Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. After 14 classical games, the score is 7-7 between Nepomniachtchi and Liren. The players went over to the rapid section. 3 games played so far. It's 1.5, 1.5. 3 draws. And this is the 4th game, the all-decisive game to determine the new world champion. Of course, in case of a draw, we are moving over to the Blitz. But first we have this 4th classical game. Who's going to be the successor of Magnus Carlsen? It's Nepo playing with the white pieces against Ding. And no surprise, the players, they stick to the repertoire with 1 e4. e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castle, bishop e7, d3 again, b5, bishop b3, d6. And now earlier in the match I've said already Ding faced the moves c3 and a3, but Nepo decides to stick to the line he used in game 2 of the rapid. Plays here the move a4, bishop d7, and now the move a3 again. Everything has still been seen in the previous game where Nepo had the white pieces. Bishop e3, knight a5, attacking the bishop. Bishop comes back to a2 and black captures the pawn. But it's a positional concession because obviously these pawns on the a file, they are not very nice and white will try to regain these pawns. Well, in the 2nd game, Nepo played here the move bishop d2. But between these games, he must have had some contact with his seconds. And instead of playing this move bishop d2, he improved his play here with the move knight c3, which is more precise. Black goes rook b8, attacking the pawn on b2. And now we get to see a very interesting idea, kind of unusual in this opening. As white played here the move bishop to b1. What is this bishop doing here? It looks like the bishop goes to the most ugly diagonal available. It's not doing anything there. But the main point, of course, is that it opens up the path for the rook on the a file. Black decided to protect the pawn on a4. With the move queen e8, very interesting. But it should also be clear that a move like rook takes b2 is a possibility. And now after knight takes a4, the knight threatens the rook. If the rook goes back, then Nepo's prep was probably based on this move, knight c5. Very nice, interesting idea. It's a sort of discovered attack on the knight on a5. So if you take on c5, it's rook takes a5. Black is a pawn up. But if you look at all these pawn weaknesses, this looks quite ugly for black. Of course, black could decide also to drop back with a knight to avoid the ruining of his pawn formation. But after knight takes d7, rook takes a6, white has managed to get the bishop pair. And okay, it's still a playable position perhaps, but very soon the bishop will come over to a2 when the light squares, they are seriously weak, and white definitely has some long-term pressure against the black king also. Was not played in the game. Ding went for the move queen e8, protects the pawn on a4 and keeps the threat of rook takes b2 alive. It's b3. So with the point, the pawn cannot be taken as the knight can simply be captured. Therefore, white is going to regain the pawn. But black is going to play c5, very typical way of proceeding. And after knight takes a4, white has won its pawn back, but the knight goes back from a5 to c6. Very unusual position from this Spanish type of play. Because how to evaluate this position? Well, first of all, this bishop on b1 is not the most beautiful piece. It's in fact quite a bad piece, and white will have to come up with a plan to bring it back into the game. It is not only the bishop is affected by its poor placement, but it also prevents the rooks from operating together. So why does white go for this line? Well, there's a pawn weakness on the a file, and Nepo decided to attack it straight away with the move knight c3, so that it opens up the file for the rook. In hindsight, this might not have been the best decision. What I like better here is the move c3. So that the bishop will come back to c2. The bishop protects both the pawns on b3 and d3. And sooner or later, white will try to find a pawn break. But it's a very equalish type of position. It's not like you're fighting for an advantage here. But Nepo goes knight c3. Black goes a5 to protect the pawn. And what is white going to do next? Well, there's this plan of rerouting the knight from f3 to d2. Bishop e6 played. And well, the big question is the knight going to c4, or how about a move like f4, which is also an active way of playing, but it seems to me that if you do take the pawn, bishop takes, queen d7, black is very solid. Its pieces are nicely connected, rooks are working together, and very soon, if the rook is no longer on b8, then we will get to see the pawn break d6, d5, and then black's pieces will be more actively placed, more ready to strike in the center, especially keeping in mind that poor bishop on b1. So instead, opening the center favors black, and therefore better is the move knight c4. But interestingly, here Ding decides to go for the move d5 anyway, which is perhaps a little bit premature. I would have liked to see the move queen d7 first to make sure that the rooks are able to come to open files immediately when the center gets opened. And the tactical justification is that after knight takes a5, white could take the pawn, there's a rook a8, and look, now we see how bad this bishop is on b1, because the rook on a1 is unprotected, the knight on a5 is threatened to be taken, knight takes c6 runs into rook takes a1. So queen d7 would have been a more precise move here, but the number of inaccuracies is of course explained by the shorter time control. We will get to see more decisions based on intuition rather than calculation. d5 itself, it's an interesting move, though after e takes d5, knight takes d5, black is active, but also there are quite a number of weak pawns which require permanent protection. So keeping in mind that this bishop on b1 is still pretty badly placed, it would have made a lot of sense here for white to take on d5, and after bishop takes d5, move the pawn to c3 so that the bishop can slide over to c2. Then the queen will be able to move as well, and keep in mind that very soon that pawn on a5 is threatened to be taken, especially with the bishop on c2, the rook on a1 will be supported by the other white pieces. Instead, bishop d2 was played, and here black can still decide to avoid the exchange of knights. And I think that would be quite a clever thing to do, in the sense that white is suffering from a lack of space. So the move knight takes c3 comes as a huge surprise to me. It's a playable move, but it's also quite solid rather than fighting for the initiative. For instance, a move like knight f4 is a move which is really applauded by the engines, because you're looking for ways to build up the pressure against the white king. Imagine the queen comes over, maybe there are possible sacrifices, or just after something like rook e1, the knight can just come back to g6, the pawn on e5 is very nicely supported, and we can continue our attacking ideas, maybe with a move f5, queen d7 and so on, just with an extra pair of minor pieces on the board. And the knight is doing great on g6. And of course, in case of bishop takes f4, e takes f4, we may use this pawn later to try to open up the white king side. Maybe knight comes into d4. So there's a lot of attacking play here for black available. Let's see what happened in the game. Knight takes c3, bishop takes c3, and now that pawn on a5 is 3 times attacked by white's pieces. So black removes the attacker. Bishop takes c4, b takes c4. Pawn on a5 is still threatened to be taken by the bishop. So black goes bishop d8. That's a nice technical move. And after bishop d2, the bishop comes over to c7. It's protecting both these pawns. The bishop itself is maybe not too great yet, but Ding will come up with a very nice plan for the bishop. White goes c3. Finally, the move c3 played. f5. And we are waiting for the bishop to come over to c2, but still was not played. Instead, rook e1, which is also quite a sensible move, trying to exert pressure on the e-file. But there is rook d8. The rook comes back into the game. White goes rook a2, with the idea to overprotect the bishop so that the queen can move later without worrying about e4 ideas. Black goes queen g6. Nice active move. Queen d7 is another way of playing. In any case, after queen g6, white played queen e2. And the idea of black's last move is revealed now as the queen comes over to d6. So this is a very nice move. And the bishop and queen are looking in the direction of the white king. So if black would get another move, he would play e4, opening up the diagonal for the queen to enter on h2 when it will be checkmate very soon. Well, there's not much white can do against it. So g3 is the move white had been anticipating, of course. Closing off the diagonal, the queen can never come on h2 with check. And now rook d e8. So with pawns on e5 and f5, it's nicer to have the rooks behind them so that potential pawn breaks, either the move e5 e4 or f5 f4, the rooks are better off. White goes queen f3. Very interesting move. All of a sudden things are heating up because queen f3 comes with a positional threat of playing the move queen d5, forcing the exchange of queens when black's attacking chances are over. If you would have to take on d5, c takes d5, that would even be a further improvement of white's pawn formation, can get a protected passed pawn. Black doesn't want to allow it. He could have gone for knight e7, which is objectively the most accurate move. But Ding gets ambitious now. He plays the move e4. Very tempting move. And it's all because of that move queen f3, this move e4. It's so tempting because you attack the queen with gain of time. You see why the rook is on a2 now. After d takes e4, which was played, the bishop cannot be taken as the rook covers the bishop. So what's the idea? Well, there is the move knight to e5. So it's a clearance sacrifice so that the knight comes in to the center, attacking the queen. And now the most natural move would be to play queen e2 to try to keep everything under control. But there is f takes e4. This was not played in the game. There didn't follow queen e2 for a good reason, because black is threatening knight f3 with a huge knight fork. If you go bishop takes e4, it's knight f3 check anyway. Once again, you see why these rooks are so important. The first rook covers the knight. The bishop cannot take the knight because that allows the move rook takes e2, winning the queen. If the king goes away in this position, well, there is just knight takes e1. So black is going to win material. Therefore, the queen is badly off on e2. Instead, Nepo played here the move queen to g2. And the big difference is that if you do take on e4, it's bishop takes e4, and now knight f3 can just be met by bishop takes f3. Everything is nicely protected in white's position. So that doesn't work. Instead, Ding played here the move knight to d3. Interesting move. Attacking the rook. And also there are ideas to take on e4 next, after which the knight, together with the rook, attacks the pawn on f2. Things are very dangerous now. Bishop takes d3 was played. Queen takes d3. So black would love to take on e4, followed by taking the pawn on c4 with great prospects. But it's white's turn first. He goes e takes f5, taking the pawn. Rook takes e1, bishop takes e1. Pieces are coming off the board, but still, the most powerful pieces are still on the board. It's a position, open position with major pieces and bishops on the board. If you take the pawn on f5, it's queen d5 again. White would love to exchange the queens. But of course, we are going to take the pawn on c4, hitting the rook with gain of time. And this is a difficult moment because Nepo's choice in the game, rook a1, very understandable, keeping the bishop protected. But the machine clearly prefers here to move rook d2, which is a difficult move to spot. On the other hand, you would like to activate your pieces as much as you can. Bring the rooks to the center, to the open files. After queen takes c3, it looks as if the rook cannot really move because the bishop can just be taken. But it's queen to d5 check, king h8, and now, for instance, queen e6 protects the bishop. And look, in just a few moves, white's pieces have entered the center. And there are ideas to play rook d7, attacking the queen, attacking the bishop. All of a sudden, there are a lot of threats against black's pieces, but also against the black king. White would have been much better in that case. But rook a1 played. And of course, don't forget, it's a rapid game. It explains the number of inaccuracies played by both players. But things are heating up now. Black recaptures on f5. It's very, very sharp position because white would love to become active here with a move like queen c6. Attacking the bishop, maybe there's potential check. But I guess Nepo refrained from playing this move because of bishop takes g3. Spectacular sacrifice with the point that if you take, it's a rook f1 check. King h2, queen e2. Now the reason we went to h2 is that there's still queen g2 and you are not getting checkmated. But there's rook takes e1 and the material is equal again. And this endgame is likely going to end in a draw. Queen endgame with equal number of pawns, and otherwise one of the players will initiate a perpetual. Therefore, before doing anything else, Nepo played bishop d2, hoping to consolidate its position by bringing the bishop to e3 soon. Black decides to go h6 so that the king can always escape to h7 if needed. Queen c6, putting pressure on the bishop, and black decides to protect it. Very nice technical move. And after rook e1, so the rook comes into the game, black goes king h7. Look at the coordination of black's forces. Queen protects the rook protects the bishop, and at the same time, all of black's pieces, they are still looking in the direction of the white king. Bishop e3. White is going after the pawn on c5. And now queen takes c3 is a possibility, attacking the rook. But there's queen e4, king g8, and now there are just a number of moves to attack the black queen, and likely, okay, queens may be exchanged, and it will lead to a draw eventually. Very equalish endgame. But both players are fighting for the initiative in the most important game of their life. Bishop e5. Rather than taking with the queen on c3, black brings in the bishop. Queen e8. Attacking the bishop one more time. And now it's bishop takes c3. Conscious decision by Nepo, as he wanted the bishop to take so that the rook can pin the bishop on c3. And it's very tactical now. The big threat is rook takes c3 when the queen is overloaded. Had to defend the bishop, but also to keep the rook defended. For instance, if you move the rook away, let's say you go rook f3, there is this move, rook takes c3, which is the killer blow. After queen takes c3, it's queen e4, winning the rook back, white is a piece up. So the only move here, rook f6, keeping the rook protected. And still, Nepo has various options, and the most tempting move would be to play bishop d2. Looks as if you're winning the bishop, but it does allow black to play queen d4. Giving up the bishop on c3, and after queen takes f2, king h1, black can force the repetition. It's a piece down, but it's a draw. Nepo plays more ambitiously, goes for the move queen d7. He's trying to set new traps, and this is a very tricky one. Because what is the idea of queen d7? Well, if you would ignore anything, like you play the move a4, it's queen to d1, and there's nothing, but really nothing you can do against queen c2 check. And after that, the bishop on c3 is hanging, the bishop cannot move, because the queen is unprotected. So that's a very subtle threat. White is about to go queen d1 and queen c2. If you do anything else about it, let's say you move the queen away, keep in mind that the d3 square should also remain covered, as it comes with check and hitting the bishop. So here again, the only move to get out of the pin, it's queen e2. Excellent idea. With the point that rook takes c3, runs into queen to e1. With a double attack, black is material up. Queen d5 played. And now the bishop goes away. Now the bishop is protected again. Very important strategy. Try to make sure your pieces are safe. You're not able to drop anything. Queen e4 check. King g8. Black is a pawn up. But white can give a repetition, it looks like. Queen d5. King h7. Queen e4. Players are down to a minute each, more or less. And you would expect Ding to go king g8. All the commentators were expecting him to go in that direction. But look what he did. He played here the move rook g6 to keep the game going, avoiding the perpetual check. And this is a really remarkable decision because look, you're placing your rook in a pin. It's a self pin, and how to get out of it? Well, that's not really the point. You're planning to run with your pawn and distract white's forces from exerting threats against that rook. For instance, the move h4 is a move you would love to play, and you would like to go h5, but the queen still covers the h5 square, so no chance to attack the rook yet. However, this is what white should have done. If you go a4 now, it's queen f5, preparing the move h5, and well, probably you got to force the exchange of queens somehow. But instead, look what Nepo did. Nepo wanted to reverse the idea. He started with the move queen f5, but this time the queen is no longer controlling the c pawn. So black, instead of pushing the a pawn, brings up the c pawn. This is very important because now, getting lower on time, he goes for h4, believing that h5 is a big threat, but overlooking the move queen d3. That's the big difference between a4 and c4. The queen offers the exchange of queens, indirectly covers the diagonal. So, and of course, the exchange of queens is just a hopeless endgame. You're going to put the rook behind the pawn, and it's a technically winning endgame. So instead, queen f3 played. Nepo had to keep queens on the board, but everything is defended. There are no threats. Big move here is bishop d2. It's like the killer move. Absolutely, the bishop cannot take because queen is hanging. Case of rook d1, pinning the bishop on d2. It allows c3, and black is completely winning here. Ding instead played the move rook f6, wanted to tickle the queen first. Also very understandable. And after queen g4, now he played the move c3. Rook d1, attacking the queen, but after queen g6, black has everything under control. White goes queen c8, getting behind the passed pawn and ready to go up with the rook to d8. But there's rook c6, chasing the queen away, and the rook supports the advance of the pawn. Queen a8, and now a lot of possibilities. But here, Ding should have gone maybe for c2. Very interesting move. Maybe he was just afraid there's counterplay with rook d8, threatening checkmate. If you go c1 queen, bishop takes, rook takes, black is a piece up. But after king h2, there are still mating threat. But look, if you go queen c6, you force the exchange of queens, you're threatening checkmate with the rook to h1. If rook h8 is king g6, all the checks are over. But getting lower on time, you don't really want to take any risk. Ding thought he is winning anyway, want to play it safe, offers the exchange of rooks. Very human decision. Rook takes d6, queen takes, queen e4 check, queen comes back, queen blocks. Once again, we would welcome any exchanges as black. Queen c4, now queen b1, king h2. Another very critical moment, because all of a sudden, it's not that simple to push the c pawn. If you go c2, it blocks off the diagonal for the queen to cover its own king. There's queen e4, king g8, queen e6, it's going to be a repetition. Therefore, the c pawn cannot be pushed any longer. Instead, a4 was played. Bishop to d4, black goes a3. There are two passed pawns, but what is happening here? Well, white would love to generate counterplay by threatening mate with the queen. Queen f7, but black still has queen g6. That is the main defense. It's an incredibly tricky position. There are a lot of options. h5 is a very interesting move. And if black is careless, let's say he plays the move a2, he's planning to make a new queen, but there could have followed queen f7. And there's no way to protect the mate any longer. And thanks to the pawn on h5, the g6 square has been taken away from the queen. So this would have been an incredibly tricky move. a2 is not a possibility. Black would have to find something else. Even another move, like bishop takes g7, apparently leads to a repetition of moves. The king is wide open. There are so many checks. Black's king cannot escape from all these checks. But instead, queen c7 was played straight away. Very understandable. You're threatening mate, but now the queen comes back to g6 as well. Now you cannot deflect the queen with h5 because you do take the pawn with check. And white will move the king, and the queen comes back, and everything is just completely winning after that. These pawns are going to be decisive. Queen c4 played. But now the move c2 on the board. The bishop cannot be taken because black gets a new queen. White had to go back with the bishop to e3, but now everything is under control. You can move the bishop away. White played king g2, hoping to come over to these pawns and setting up a small threat, because it's a subtle move. If you're careless, white's going to play h5, And the queen can no longer stay really well on this diagonal to keep the pawn defended. And after h5, queen takes h5 is no longer coming with check. So that means that after queen takes h5, queen takes c2, we have managed as white to get rid of that annoying pawn. Therefore, ding, cool as a cucumber, played here the move h5, stopping all the threats. King f1, bishop e5, excellent move. The bishop is on its way to b2. Everything is game over. If you go with your king to e2, it's queen g4, forcing the exchange of queens. It's a hopeless bishop endgame. The a-pawn can just come up the board. White played here a desperate move, but it should be said that if king e1, there's bishop b2, king f1, for instance, just making waiting moves. You promote the c-pawn, bishop takes, queen b1, and you pick up the bishop next. Instead, there followed g4, but it's totally game over. hg4, h5, hoping to get some sort of counterplay in case of queen takes. It's queen takes c2 with check, but we keep the pawn defended. Queen d5, g3, opening up white's king. f4 played, and now a2. Nice deflection idea. So that the queen got to take the pawn, and after the queen moves away, the bishop is no longer pinned. We can take on f4, and white resigned. We have a new world champion. It's Ding Liren, who wins the 4th game of the tiebreak and becomes the new world champion, the successor of Magnus Carlsen. What an incredible turnaround. He was never leading the world championship match. He only won the final game. He came back 3 times. He was trailing 3 times by 1 point, but he managed to fight back, survived a very terrible endgame in game 14 of the match, 6.5 hours of play. But he became the new world champion. An incredible effort. It's the first Chinese world champion in history. And that's a big success for his country. The women, they were already dominating for many years, but it's the first time we have this Chinese player to become a world champion. And it's a totally fair result. It's an amazing achievement of him. And congratulations, Ding, and your team, Richard Rapport and many other people helping you. It's totally deserved. Maybe a lot of people will think, well, he should never have been there. Like, remember, he qualified for this World Championship match after Magnus decided to withdraw from defending his title. But anyway, if you win in such a style, that's just an amazing performance. Do you agree with that, actually? Do you think it's a fair title? Did he deserve to win the match? Well, I think it's absolutely fine, and he deserved to do so. And I hope it will give a new impulse to chess in China, also in the world in general. It's 30 years old, Ding Liren, who is the new world champion. And I hope we will get to see many, many more spectacular world championship matches like this. Thanks for watching, for tuning in throughout this 3 weeks. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because it's only just the start of this channel, Robert Riss Chess. And definitely very soon we will cover more exciting tournaments, but also a lot of opening traps, tactics, how to study chess, etc. Everything you want to find about chess is on this channel. So don't forget to subscribe, and see you soon back again. Bye bye.